Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we will be covering the 2024 Senate elections. This map has often been described as unfavorable to Democrats who currently hold a 51-seat majority, which is very narrow. So today we are going to talk about my expectations and predictions and ratings as of today. As always, we will be using Race to the White House for our information, and I am using their ratings as they have not yet released a full-on polling map for all of the states. The first state that we are going to begin with will be the state of Tennessee, where incumbent Marsha Blackburn is seeking re-election. Here they have it R plus 27, which would be safe. That is no surprise. Tennessee is a blood red state and actually gave Trump his highest number of votes compared to Joe Biden in the number of separation. Next up, we're going to be doing Vermont, where currently Bernie Sanders is the incumbent. As of recording, Bernie Sanders has not yet announced if he will run for re-election or not. However, regardless of if he does or not, this is a safe D race. Vermont has been a Democratic state for many, many years. It has not voted red at the presidential level since 1988. It is a solid D race no matter what. Next up, North Dakota, which of course, safe R. Nebraska, safe R. Wyoming, safe R. So let's just get those out of the way. Now, Nebraska has a special election as well due to the resignation of one of their senators. Of course, it's Nebraska. That won't be cause for any type of recognition. It is a safe R race, as is Wyoming, which we covered. Next up is Minnesota. Now, Minnesota has Amy Klobuchar as the incumbent. Amy Klobuchar is known for her overperformance, and currently they rate this as safety. I do not. I'm going to put this as likely simply due to the fact that we are seeing such a increase in political polarization in this country. As we saw in New York last year, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who was known for his historical overperformances in elections, was significantly downgraded from his previous performances due to the increased political polarization that our country faces. And I believe that Amy Klobuchar will face the same thing. Next up is Missouri. There has been little talk of Missouri being competitive. I don't believe that it will. I'm giving this a likely rating despite the fact that Race to the White House has it R plus 20, which I would typically consider safe, due to the fact that it was likely R in 2022, which was, while not the best year for Republicans, was better than previous elections such as 2020 or 2018. However, this will not be a close likely. This is probably 13, 14 type of likely. However, the frontrunner for the Democrats is running a very strong campaign, and he could likely get that to a likely margin. Next up is Montana with Senator Jon Tester. Jon Tester is in a very tight race due to the fact that Montana is a solid red state. As a matter of fact, a Democrat has not won Montana since the 90s when Bill Clinton won it. Currently, they have this as a generic R plus 0.7. However, we do know that generics typically way overperform any type of actual nominee because a generic candidate has no issues, has no flaws. And with a generic candidate only being given R plus 0.7, I am going to give this race a lean D rating, simply because a perfect candidate, which is what a generic candidate is only projected by R plus 0.7. So as of now, I'm rating this lean. Utah is rated likely R. However, that margin would be safe for me, and I completely agree. Mitt Romney is an excellent candidate for Utah. We saw that in his 2018 election bid in Utah and his 2012 presidential bid, where he was one of the best performing Republicans ever in the state of Utah. Next up is Washington, which is currently rated safe D and has Cantwell up by 21.3. I agree that the race is safe. I wouldn't say Cantwell wins by 21% just because that's a very high margin to hit, but this is certainly not a competitive race. Next up, California. California, obviously a safe D race. California is special though because they have nonpartisan primaries, which means that all candidates, Democratic and Republican, are in the same primary, and the top two advance to the general election. As of right now, it looks that Representative Katie Porter and Congressman Adam Schiff will be the two to advance to the general election. In that, I believe that Katie Porter would win that, simply because Katie Porter has the progressive base down. Also, along with she would likely win the Republican areas. Despite the fact that Adam Schiff is objectively more conservative than Katie Porter, Adam Schiff has such a negative reputation among Republican voters that he would fail in those areas. And also, due to Katie Porter being to the left of Adam Schiff, she would win in the more progressive areas, while Adam Schiff would probably win, of course, his congressional district in the more moderate areas of California. Overall, a safety race that I think Katie Porter will win. Next up is Nevada. Nevada, currently, they have it as lean D, and they have a projected of Rosen plus 10. That would be likely to me. There is absolutely no way that Senator Rosen would win by 10 plus, especially as we saw in our previous video. I give Nevada a tilt D rating, which is the lowest rating that I can give. So I think this will be a lean D race, simply for the fact that incumbents typically tend to do well, and because last year in 2022, despite the fact that Catherine Cortez Masto was very much considered that she would probably lose re-election and won, I think that Nevada Democrats will re-elect their senator once again. Next up, Arizona. Arizona, now this is a very interesting state due to Kristen Sinema, who is an independent that caucuses with the Democrats. Kristen Sinema has been very controversial among the Democratic Party due to her votes on things like a $15 minimum wage and her simple way more conservative than she needs to be. She's comparable to Senator Joe Manchin, except Joe Manchin is in a Trump state while she's in a Biden state. So, Representative Galileo is challenging her for her seat. Now, we don't know if Kristen Sinema is going to run for re-election or not. However, if she does, that could present a three-way race. However, Kristen Sinema is so unpopular with every demographic in the state that I really don't think she would be that significant of a candidate. She is not liked among Arizona Democrats, Arizona Republicans, and yes, even Arizona Independents. They currently have Galileo winning by 7.4. I don't think he would win by that much. I'm going to give him a lean rating. I also want to talk about my prediction for Kristen Sinema. I currently don't believe that she will run for re-election just because she does not actively seem like someone who is in a re-election mindset right now. It appears that she does not like working in the Senate. This is not her thing. She wants to retire and maybe be a lobbyist. That seems far more likely to me at this moment than her running for re-election in a state that right now she obviously cannot win. Next up, we have New Mexico. Now, New Mexico is not a very competitive state. It appears that Race to the White House has a little bit crashed on me. So, there we go, it's back. Currently, they have Senator Heinrich winning by 19.2. I think that's a bit of a high margin, and I don't see him hitting that just because in 2020, Joe Biden won the state by 10, and he will likely match that. I believe that in the polling that we covered in my last video, it had Biden up by 12, and I just can't see Heinrich outrunning Biden by that much, so I'm going to give it a likely D rating. It'll probably be D plus 10, D plus 12, something along those lines. Next up is Texas. Now, as we saw in my previous video, Donald Trump is only winning up in Texas polls by about 1%, which is a very small margin, especially considering the fact that this state used to be one of the most Republican states in the country. Ted Cruz is a very unpopular senator and will be likely facing Democratic Representative Colin Aldridge. However, they currently give Cruz plus 6.7. I don't quite buy that, because that would be a likely margin, and it is hard for me to see Ted Cruz outrunning Trump by about 5%, especially due to the fact that Colin Aldred is such a strong candidate for Senate. I'm going to give this a lean rating, and I would say this is probably about a 3 or 4, because I do believe that Cruz will outrun Donald Trump simply because Donald Trump is such a toxic candidate for the suburbs, and while Cruz is no example of electoral godliness, he is not quite as toxic as Donald Trump, and therefore I think he could definitely outrun him by 2 to 3 points, but I don't think he could pull off 5. Next up, we're going to do Wisconsin, which currently has Senator Tammy Baldwin. Senator Tammy Baldwin has been well known for her ability to outrun generic Democrats and other Democrats down ballot. I rate this likely D. I don't think it's going to be as much as they say with 9.2. However, I could definitely see her winning by 5 or 6. I also see that because the best Republican candidate recently said that he would not run. That leaves a open primary field without a super strong candidate, and Republican voters are not known for picking the strongest candidates in their primaries. We saw that in 2022, especially with candidates in Ohio that allowed Marcy Kaptur to be reelected, or in Pennsylvania, which allowed John Fetterman to be elected. So simply, I do believe that this race will be likely because, one, Tammy Baldwin is such a strong candidate. Two, the Republican candidate who could give her the biggest run for her money is not running. And three, I believe that primary voters in the state are very likely to make the mistakes that they made before by giving people who definitely are not the most electable the nomination. Next up is Michigan. This currently has Elissa Slotkin winning by 5.4. I don't think Slotkin will win by that much. I currently have Biden winning the state by around 3%. And I think she will perfectly match that, simply because she's not a terrible candidate, but she's not an electoral god or anything. So I think she'll run on par with Biden, maybe a few points below, maybe a few points ahead. But they're definitely going to be around each other, so I'm going to give that a lean D race. Next up, we have Indiana, the crossroads of America. This currently has Banks up by 18. I could definitely see that happening. Indiana is a very Republican state, and there's no real reason to believe that it won't be safe again. I mean, maybe in with a very strong Democratic candidate, they could perhaps get it down to likely. However, I just don't really see that happening because of how solidly red Indiana is. In comparison, Indiana is basically Republicans' Illinois. As a matter of fact, Indiana in 2020 voted for Trump by 17%, and Biden won Illinois by 17%, so that won't be a competitive race. Next up, we have Ohio with an incumbent Democrat, Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown will definitely be in a tough race for re-election due to the fact that his state has become so Republican since Donald Trump entered the political scene in 2016. However, Sherrod Brown has always been an electoral overperformer, and I could definitely see him winning again. So let's check what they say. They currently have Brown winning by 1.7. I actually agree with that. Now, the reason I agree with that is we can adjust for the shift that occurs between elections. So let's take a look at the 2018 Senate elections. Now, 2018 was a D+8 year, and Sherrod Brown was able to win re-election by 6.8 in that type of year. 2024 will likely not be a D+8 year. We will probably see something more like D+4 or 5. simply because that's typically how well Democrats do in the popular vote when they win the election, which I currently predict Joe Biden will do. So let's shift that. So it's about a 4% shift. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That would have Sherrod Brown winning by 2.8. And when accounting for Ohio's rightward shift anyways, that could definitely be a Brown plus 1.7 raise. So I'm definitely going to give Sherrod Brown re-election. Next up is West Virginia. West Virginia currently has Democratic Senator Joe Manchin up for re-election. Joe Manchin is a dying breed of Democrats from the coal area, which they used to dominate. I'm giving this race a safe rating simply because the Republican frontrunner is a very, very strong candidate. It's the current governor, whose name I cannot remember right now. However, he will definitely win that race. However, Joe Manchin only losing by 16 would actually be pretty good because typically Republicans win that place by around 40%, especially with Donald Trump on the ballot. Next up, Pennsylvania. This has Senator Bob Casey, who has always been a very popular senator and who has always won re-election by huge margins. They currently give it a likely rating, and I agree with that. I'm not sure if he will win by 11. I could definitely see it being high-low digits, though, but I'm going to give it a likely rating. Next up is New York, where we have Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. I give this race a safe rating. Some would argue likely due to the fact that it was likely in 2022 with an electoral overperformer Chuck Schumer, but it's also worth noting that typically party leaders such as Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, after they become leader, they typically tend to do worse because suddenly they no longer represent the state, they represent the party. And so they lose a lot of that bipartisan support that they maybe once had. However, Kirsten Gillibrand is not the leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate. She is just your average senator, and also it's worth noting that this will have presidential turnout, not a midterm turnout, which means more New York Democrats will vote, which was the problem for Democrats in New York in 2022. Many of them just simply did not turn out. So anyways, I'm going to give that race a safe D rating. Next up is Maine. We have Senator King, who recently announced that he will be running for re-election. Senator King is well known for being able to outperform expectations. As a matter of fact, let's reset this real fast. Even with that 4-point shift, he won by over 15%. And if this would load, we can show how much he actually won by in 2018. He won by 19.1%, and that was with another Democrat on the ballot. He is very good at gaining bipartisan support because while he won by 19.1 on that ballot, we can check the governor's race for Maine in 2018, which saw Governor Mills only win by 7.7%. So this race could very well be safe. However, there's also a newfound political division in the country, and so he may not be able to get the support that he once did. Currently, I am going to leave this race as a safe rating due to his previous electoral overperformance and what Race to the White House says. However, it would not surprise me if that race became a likely D race at all. Next up, we have Virginia, who currently has Senator Tim Kaine, who was the Democratic nominee for vice president in 2016. Tim Kaine is also known for his electoral overperformance. However, I don't think this will be a safe rating like this currently projects. I know on screen it says likely, but it says Kaine plus 15.8, which is a safe rating for me. I'm going to give this likely. I suspect Biden will probably win Virginia by around 12%, and I could certainly see Senator Kaine winning by 13 or 14, maybe even 15. He could definitely get it to a safe rating, but since we're so far out and so much is unknown, and currently it looks like Republicans in Virginia will put up a strong challenger to Tim Kaine, I'm going to leave it as a likely D race. Next up, we have the state of Florida. Florida currently has Senator Rick Scott. I think this will be a likely race simply because Florida has taken a massive trend to the right, and while I suspect that it will not be as big as a blowout as many people are thinking it will be, especially after the 2022 midterms. I definitely don't think that this will be a super competitive race for the Democrats. It currently has Rick Scott winning by about 12.3%. I don't think Rick Scott will win by that much. I'm thinking maybe more 7 or 8. I currently have the state as Trump plus 5 or 6, something like that. And so I think Rick Scott could definitely outrun him by 1 to 2%. However, Rick Scott is also known for kind of being an underperformer in politics, and so he could also definitely underperform Trump, especially due to how many scandals Rick Scott has, such as his Medicare scandal and the Social Security scandal, which, as we know, Social Security is a very important issue to voters in Florida, as it is a very common place for retirees to go. However, due to its rightward shift, I'm going to give that an likely R rating, and it's probably going to be about 7 or 8 in favor of Rick Scott. Next up, we have Mississippi. This is safe R. I don't have much to say about this other than the fact that they do have an interesting governor's race up this year, which looks like it might be competitive and will be the next video I cover, which is the 2023 governor elections, which includes Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Moving on, we have Massachusetts, which currently has Democrat Elizabeth Warren. She was a 2020 candidate for president. She came third place in the Democratic nomination. She's a very well-known name. She will easily win re-election. This is Massachusetts. It's a very solid Democratic state. No real contest there. Next up, we have Senator Whitehouse. Senator Whitehouse, this is Rhode Island. It's safe, and Whitehouse is known to be an electoral overperformer. Biden will likely win here by about 20. And so I could definitely see Whitehouse winning by 24. Next up, we have Murphy. Murphy is a very popular senator, and it will certainly be safety for him. Next up, we have New Jersey. They currently give this Menendez plus 10. Menendez is a very unpopular senator who has many corruption scandals and honestly should not run for re-election. However, it is New Jersey, and he will win re-election simply due to his partisan lean. But he will definitely underperform the other candidates in the New Jersey elections. Moving on, we have Delaware. Delaware is, of course, the home state of President Joe Biden, and Senator Tom Carper, who is the incumbent, recently announced that he will not be seeking re-election. As of right now, it seems that the statewide representative will replace him. This is of course a safety race due to Biden being on the ballot and Delaware's historical Democratic voting record. Next up, we have Maryland. Here we have another seat where the Democratic incumbent has decided to retire. Maryland, of course, will be a safe race no matter who the Democratic nominee or the Republican nominee is. Next up, and finally, we have Hawaii, which has Senator Harino up for re-election. Of course, Hawaii will be a safety race. This leaves a 50-50 Senate, which is the exact same number that the Senate was after the 2020 elections. This means that Democrats will control the Senate because I've also predicted in my previous video that President Biden and Vice President Harris will be re-elected, meaning that Vice President Harris will be there to break the tie. Thank you all so much for watching, and please check back at the next video.